Um, Hello and welcome, everyone, to this online training session. Over the next hour and a half, we will hear from 5 speakers, including myself, who will discuss how to research various aspects of migration and refugee narratives and histories in libraries, archives, and online resources. These speakers include Paul Dudman, archivist at the University of East London. Paul will be introducing the wider work of the Centre of Migration, Refugee and Belonging and the archives collections of the Living Refugee and Refugee Council Archives. Hester Swift and Laura Griffiths are librarians at the Institute of Advanced Legal Studies Library. Hester and Laura will be discussing how to research refugee law, with a case study focusing on researching the 1951 Refugee Convention. Myself, I'll be introducing you to the collections of the IHR Library and looking at the various different resources and sources you can find here on migration and refugee narratives. And Jenny Lelkesh-Rarugal, editor of the Bibliography of British and Irish History, will be demonstrating how to use the bibliography to research migration and refugee narratives as well. There will be a Q&A at the end, so if you have any questions or comments during the presentations, please put them in the chat. Also, please be aware that this session is being recorded, so we ask if your microphones be on mute, if not already, and you may wish to turn your camera off as well. So without any further ado, I will introduce our first speaker, Paul, and who will talk to you about the various different matters at the University of East London. Thank you.
Okay, so yes, thank you, Michael, and the introduction, and the lovely to be with you all today and talk about the work we're doing here at the University of East London. I'll just share my screen with you all now, and sort of hope you can all sort of see that. Okay, so what we're going to, the purpose of this session will be to look at this both as an introduction to the archival work that we're doing here at the UEL, and also to give an overview of our research centre known as the Centre for Migration, Refugees and Belonging here at UEL. Okay, so I'll start with a brief overview of our research centre, which is so our CMRB was originally established back in 2004, which was in response to the a growing group of academic research coming together, focusing specifically on the research and engagement around issues of refugeehood and wider migration issues at the university, which is coalesced this time into a group of researchers actively engaging with a postgraduate MA in refugee studies. Okay, so throughout the last 2 decades, we've undertaken both research and teaching within the field of refugee and forced migration studies, with the centre in particular focusing on the interdisciplinary critical scholarship, focusing on the intersection of a number of issues related to migration, refugee and belonging, with a particular focus around the intersectional relationship between race, gender and citizenship. This has led to a comprehensive teaching programme, including both our ongoing MA in refugee studies, a more recent course focusing on conflict, displacement and human security, and also active involvement in a sort of doctoral training partnership, collaborating with both Bloomsbury and UCL. Yeah, whilst there's, of course, an academic focus to a lot of this work, we've also been conscious of trying to sort of engage more on a community-based level, looking specifically around sort of how we sort of work to sort of document and represent the sort of community narratives of migration, and also, where possible, trying to bring these narratives into the active sort of academic work of the university. This has included working closely with those who have had a first-hand experience of sort of the sort of migration journey. One example of this is the recent exhibition that was showcased towards the end of last year, called Talash, which was a collaborative project working with two former refugees, Majid Adin and Arash Nuriman, who are sort of two Iranian artists who used this opportunity to develop an exhibition documenting their own lived experience of sort of the sort of seeking asylum within the UK. This project in particular focused on a series of short videos and photographs taken by sort of Majid and Arash, both at the France-UK border and also subsequent to their arrival and integration in London. So this has very much been an ongoing sort of collaboration to bring these sort of first-hand narratives to life, to move beyond the sort of the purely academic engagement, and to really try and provide a participatory, collaborative approach to engagement on these issues. And this is very much related to our ongoing work with our sort of refugee migration archives here at the university, which I will go on to discuss now. So, to give you some very brief background, we've had an archive here at the University of East London since 2002, and this very much began with the arrival of the Refugee Council Archive, which is an extensive collection focused on the history of the Refugee Council, work with engagement with refugees and asylum seekers across the UK. Yeah, this slide just gives the context of how our sort of current sort of remit of archives are sort of linking to each other, and certainly an aspect of our work is to try and work in sort of it to sort of look at how we bring archives together and to sort of encourage research and engagement across the sort of different sort of disciplinary boundaries, to highlight how sort of different narratives can coexist in different archival spaces. So certainly through this work, we've sort of tried to bring together how, for example, sort of narratives of migration and diasporic communities not only exist purely within the refugee archive space, but can also be found in other collections as well. For instance, just to give you an example, we also hold the British Olympic Association archive here at UEL, which documents the history of Team GB from 1905 through to the present. And even within a collection that's primarily sports orientated, we recently discovered a series of press cuttings dating from the London Olympics in 1948, documenting several examples of the sort of, athletes who had competed at the London 48 Games, subsequently seeking asylum in the United Kingdom following their participation sort of in the games. So it's, I think, one of the key areas of research that we try to bring out here is to sort of to think about how archival collections can sort of can contain multiple narratives and multiple points of entry to the materials that they contain. Yes, in terms of our refugee and migration collections, as I say, this started out with the Refugee Council Archive as a singular collection back in 2002. And as you can get an idea from this slide here, this has expanded over the last 2 decades to include in total just over 15 individually named collections looking at different aspects of the refugee and migration experience. Examples here include the Association of Ukrainian Women Archive, which is our most recent deposit, which again sort of documents the history of the sort of Ukrainian women in the UK, dating back to the end of the Second World War in 1948. A number of these collections, so here we have a mixture of collections, both documenting the sort of, perhaps the third sector response to refugee and migration issues in the UK, but also collections which focus specifically on individual communities and representing their own history and the history and narratives as part of the collection. So to give you a brief context on the history of the Refugee Council and its archive. So the Refugee Council was originally established in 1951 as 2 separate organisations, the British Council for Aid to Refugees and the Standing Conference on Refugees, both of which were founded in 1951 in response to the convening of the United Nations Convention relating to the status of refugees. Therefore, the archive, in essence, contains over 70 years of material documenting both the work of the Refugee Council as an active charity in support of refugee and migration issues, but also an extensive thematic special collection of published and grey literature, which reflecting the work of the Refugee Council over that period. And we were fortunate that they had the foresight to be able to pretty much collect and preserve a lot of the material that they'd used over the course of that 70-year period in support of sort of informing their work with refugees, which now can represent an extensive special collection of material documenting the majority of the refugee flows and movements over that period of time. We now estimate that this collection alone represents in the region of 35,000 items, with new deposits continuing to accrue for this particular collection. This led us to think about the importance of not only documenting the third sector response to refugees and asylum seekers, but also to think about how we start to sort of document the lived experience of migration and how we start to bring in those narratives to inform the wider sort of history of migration. So over the past decade or so, we've been specifically focusing more on sort of working in partnership to bring in sort of a number of oral history-based collections, which look to focus more directly with the sort of community histories of the diaspora groups. So you have an example here of several of the oral history collections that we now have, which documents both, for example, the history of Kosovans in Manchester, the Irish community in London, the Chinese community also in Manchester as well. And again, this is just an example. We've recently received 2 oral history collections representing the sort of 50th anniversary of the Ugandan Asian exodus in 1972. Yeah, I'm sort of keeping an eye on time, so I'll run through some of these slides fairly quickly. So very much our sort of approach moving forward is to think about how we can continue to undertake sort of bottom-up oral history approaches in order to help generate sort of genuine collections which are representative of the lived narrative experience of the sort of refugees here in the UK, and also to think about how we can generally adapt the work that we do to be as inclusive as possible in working with these communities, that help ensure that the archives we are collecting now for the future are as representative of the sort of lived narratives of experience of possible. And definitely think about ideas of co-production, agency, and participatory methods as well. And the thing about how we, through this, we create an anti-oppressive oral history methodology in support of documenting the lived experience of refugees and migrants, and ensure that each of our participants can be heard within the archive, and ensure the original narrator is active when preserving and documenting the stories of migration, rather than purely being a passive storyteller. I'll briefly touch upon our Living Refugee Archive, which is celebrating our 10th anniversary this year, and which was initially established through an oral history project looking at sort of engaging with refugee narratives and the lived experience of migration in London. We created the sort of Living Refugee Archive based on the notion that refugees are the experts of their own experience, and to focus how we can ensure that our collections are made accessible, but also using the Living Refugee Archive as a collaborative and practical resource for enabling wider engagement with these issues. Certainly, as part of this sort of ethics, that the ethics of undertaking research with these communities was at the forefront of the methodologies we were looking to create, and we were particularly interested in thinking about how we use the Living Refugee Archive as a potential counter narrative to sort of help present an informed space for which refugees and those seeking asylum could find us this a sort of secure space in which to be able to sort of share their stories with the archive. I'll wrap up very quickly, just thinking about our documenting Chile archive as a case study. This was a project, an ongoing project, working with the Chilean community, both in London and across the UK, which began with an in-person exhibition called Crafting Resistance, which showcased over 150 handcrafted items produced by Chileans whilst they were in the sort of detention centres in Chile following the 1973 coup. Subsequently to this, we sort of continue this work by sort of moving this to a virtual exhibition on the Living Refugee Archive that could sort of continue to make these stories, this history, accessible to a much wider audience beyond that of the original sort of in-person exhibition. And this has resulted in our ongoing Documenting Chile archive project, which has been a participatory collaborative process working with the Chilean community to document different aspects of their sort of lived experience in the UK from the mid-1970s onwards, and to provide a space for to ensure that we can represent an active sort of collaboration to document their sort of collective memory and lived experience. And say that this is all totally free to access online. And you're welcome to take a look towards the end of this session. I'm sorry, I know I've gone a few minutes over time, but I'm happy to answer any questions in terms of accessing and researching more on these archive collections in the sort of Q&A at the end of this session. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to present at this event today. I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Brilliant. Thank you, Paul. Now, moving on, we're going to listen to now Hester and Laura, who will be talking about various aspects at the Institute of Advanced Legal Studies. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everybody. My name's Laura Griffiths, and I'm joined by my colleague Hester Swift, and we are the Academic Services Manager and Foreign International Law Librarian at the Institute of Advanced Legal Studies Library, or IHRL for short. IHRL is one of the sister institutions to the IHR within the School of Advanced Study, and we receive government funding to support postgraduate legal research. So we are open to all members of the postgraduate research and academic community. We house what is essentially the National Legal Research Collection, and amongst its many, many strengths, there's a strong element of public international law within our holdings, or the law of nations, which is an area of law seeking to establish a framework for cooperation or coexistence between states and other international actors. So it wants to create a set of norms, if you will, aimed at regulating the interactions and responsibilities of subjects of international law. Many problems have been identified with the very specifically European male voice of international law, but the noble idealism of it is really important, particularly in this day and age, because, you know, at its essence, it's seeking to enshrine universal rights. So in light of this, we're here to talk to you today about researching refugee law with a case study on researching the 1951 Refugee Convention and attendant protocols. Most of the resources that we're going to be speaking about today are freely available, but some of them are available just on an academic subscription through the IHRL's library. So considering that today's session is on migrant and refugee narratives, why are we focusing solely on refugees? And it's basically because although it's a little bit elderly and needs an update for the modern age, we have an internationally accepted, clear legal definition from refugee stemming directly from the 1951 Convention. So Article 1 of the Convention states a refugee is a person who, owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group or particular opinion, is outside the country of his nationality and is unable, or owing to such fear, is unwilling to avail himself of the protection of that country, or who, not having a nationality and being outside the country of his former habitual residence, as a result of such events, is unable, or owing to such fear, unwilling to return to it. So it's a little bit wordy, but it's there. Everyone agrees with it internationally. It's been reaffirmed multiple times in UK domestic legislation. And all of those UK domestic references will refer specifically back to the 1951 Convention. Now, we have to compare this to a legal understanding of what migrant is. And there is currently no legally agreed definition of migrant. The Max Planck Encyclopedia of Public International Law specifically states it's not a recognised term in international law. It's a notion drawn from other areas of international law. We did track down a few mentions within domestic law of what constitutes migrant. So the Nationality, Immigration and Asylum Act 2002 in section 59 gives us the wonderful description that a migrant means a person who leaves the country where he lives, hoping to settle in another country, whether or not he is a refugee by any meaning of any international convention. So there we go. Parties to the convention have got a particular responsibility towards refugees. So once the state signed up to the convention, all of their domestic immigration rules, they can't make any provisions which would breach the obligations imposed by the convention. So there's a really robust legal protection for refugees, which does not exist for migrants, and there's a correspondingly high legal hurdle to be so classified. So we've got some issues here. Mostly the political hot potato of refugee or migrant. For individual governments, this is a really important distinction. You can deal with migrants as a country under your own domestic immigration laws and processes. However, you're bound to deal with refugees through the norms of international protection. So these terms can be blurred with particularly malicious intent, particularly with a swathe of nationalism coming in. And even within the convention itself, the definition of refugee is pretty narrow. The 1951 convention solely and specifically was talking about European refugees in the post-World War II climate. It's been sort of defined ever so slightly with the 67 protocol. However, it's still not making any reference of people who are fleeing climate change or, you know, an environmental refugee. However, the 51 Convention remains the central point for anything to do with refugee law and researching in the UK. So with that in mind, I would like to hand over to our Foreign and International Law librarian, Hester Swift, to talk you through researching the 51 Convention.
Thanks, Laura. Okay, so here is the convention, screenshot off the first page, the cover. And as Laura said, the Refugee Convention from 51 is the foundation of the legal framework, although there are many other applicable instruments as well. And here on the slide, I have put the official citation for the convention. It was officially published by the United Nations in volume 189 of the UN Treaty Series, starting at page 137. So that's what UNTS stands for, UN Treaty Series. And I've also given the citation for the protocol of 1967, which took away the time limit because the 51 Convention originally applied only to people who had become refugees before 1951. The 1967 Convention took away that time limit. And the 67 Convention was published in volume 606 of the UN Treaty Series. Now, if you're researching the nuts and bolts of the Convention and Protocol, you'll want to know about the UN Treaty Collection website. This is provided by the treaty section of the United Nations for free for anyone to use. And here we have the area of the UN Treaty Collection, which is devoted to treaties sponsored or developed by the United Nations itself. And we're in the chapter on refugees and stateless persons. You can see that item 2 is the 1951 Refugee Convention and item 5 is the protocol. And there's an information page for each, and this is the official source of who is a party to the treaty and when they became a party. So if we open up the page relating to the 1951 Convention, it gives the date of entry into force, although it was concluded in 1951, it didn't come into force until 1954. We have a link to the certified true copy of the text. And then, crucially, we have the list of signatures, ratifications, and accessions. And accession to a treaty means becoming a party when you weren't one of the original signatories. So at the top of the list, we have Afghanistan acceding to this treaty on the 30th of August, 2005. Further down, you'll see Austria was one of the original signatories. So the date in the signature column for Austria. And then Austria ratified the treaty, became a party by ratifying it on the 1st of November, 1954. Now, you might be interested in researching the drafting history and the background to the convention and the protocol. In the sphere of treaties, we talk about travaux préparatoires, which just means the working documents, the preparatory documents for a treaty. which are of a great interest to historical researchers and also legal researchers if they're trying to interpret a particular provision. So there's a 3-volume compilation of travaux préparatoires for the 1951 convention by Lex Tackenberg and Christopher Tabas. It's a rather large, unwieldy lever arch file situation with reproduced photocopied UN documents in it, but it's a very valuable compilation for researchers. We have it at IHR Library, and I'm sure many other libraries in the country hold it as well. The compilation starts with a 1946 General Assembly resolution called The Question of Refugees, and it goes on from there, reproducing UN meeting records, reports, and other documents, and tracing the evolution of the text of the treaty up until the final version. Similarly, Paul Weiss, who was actually one of the lawyers who took part in the drafting of the convention, wrote a study of the travaux préparatoires, and that was published in the 1990s. We have a copy of it in IHR Library, but it has been digitized, and you can get the whole Paul Weiss work on RefWorld, which is a website produced by the Office of the High Commissioner for Refugees for researchers and people working with refugees. So the first 2 items on the slide here only refer to the drafting history of the convention, but the other 2 refer to the drafting history of both the protocol and the convention. And I'm quite a big fan of the UN Audiovisual Library of International Law. This is a free website provided to attempt to equalize access to international legal research materials throughout the world. So anyone with an internet connection can access all this material for free. And it has various different tabs. We're in the historic archives part of the Audiovisual Library at the moment. And at the top, we have a link to information about the convention and protocol. The font is very small, unfortunately. So it starts with an introductory note by a leading expert on refugee law, Guy Goodwin Gill from Oxford. Then we have an overview of the procedural history, starting with an Economic and Social Council resolution from 1949, and it gives you the reference to all the UN documents, all these strange looking references with letters and numbers, they're UN document references. Then more concisely, we've got a documents tab, which just is a list of the travaux préparatoires selected by whoever compiled this list, with links and citations to the UN documents and other information about a link to the status list for this treaty, which is what we were looking at just now on the UN Treaty Collection website. Also audio files of meetings about the protocol before they signed the protocol, and photographs from 1966, meetings concerning the protocol and the removal of the time limit for protection of refugees. Then the 4th item for drafting history is the UNHCR's RefWorld website. It has a legal instruments collection. So this is freely available. And if you're looking for travaux préparatoires, you need to go into legislative history. It doesn't just cover the convention and protocol, but that's one of its main focuses. And if you sort the documents oldest first, you'll get documents from the 1940s and 50s and 60s to do with the 51 convention and the protocol. They're much easier to use than the big lever arch files that we have in the library. Then if you want commentary on international refugee law, specifically the convention and the protocol, an early commentary was published in 1952 by Nehemiah Robinson. It's been digitized and it's available to all on the Hathi Trust Digital Library website at the link on the slide here. Then we go back to the UN Audiovisual Library because that gives you 2 free digitized books on international refugee law. So before we were on the Historic Archives tab, now we're on the Research Library tab. And you can see links to international law journals, which have been made available free here. So international law journals, but also there's this button, bottom right, access scholarly writings, it says. And then if you select refugees and stateless persons at the bottom of the screen, you get a link to Guy Goodwin Gill's International Law and the Movement of Persons Between States from 1978, and the same authors, The Refugee in International Law, second edition from 1996. So that's freely available to all. But we have both of these books in IHR's library, and we also have 3 other editions of The Refugee in International Law, published in 1983, 2007, and 2021. So they would give you a snapshot of the international legal regime at any of those dates. What else do we have in IHR's library? Well, we have in our collection hundreds of books on refugee law, published from the 1960s till 2025. And we have this commentary pictured on the slide here, edited by Zimmerman and others. We have both editions of Zimmerman, a commentary on the Convention and Protocol, published in 2011 and 2024. Zimmerman outlines the history and development of international refugee law, and then gives an article by article analysis of both the Convention and the Protocol. Finally, if you're looking for journal articles on specific aspects of international refugee law, the Hein Online database is a good place to start. We subscribe to Hein Online, and most university libraries do subscribe to Hein Online, if they have a law department, certainly. Hein Online is really good for international law research. It's also good for historical research because it makes a point of always providing a journal online from volume 1 onwards, however far back in time that was. And they've also digitized quite a lot of old law books as well. So on Hein Online, in the Law Journal module, you'll find hundreds of international law journals and with thousands of articles about refugees published from the 1920s onwards. And finally, other databases with a lot of international law journals include Westlaw and Lexis, the 2 leading law databases really in this country. We subscribe to Westlaw and Lexis at IHR's, and most universities do subscribe to Westlaw and Lexis. And now I'm going to hand back to Laura.
Okay, thank you, Hester. Obviously, this just scratches the surface of doing legal research in this area. The real interest is clearly going to be see how these rules are applied and the protections are made use of both domestically and elsewhere. We can see that there's a really robust framework established by the 1951 Convention. However, gaps remain in the implementation in various domestic jurisdictions. A lot of countries lack national legislation that aligns with the international standards. So you'd need to sort of research the 51 Convention and then compare it to what's happening domestically in their legislations to see what the inconsistencies are in protections for refugees throughout the world. Further legal barriers, such as restrictive asylum laws or limited access to legal aid in particular, can further undermine the rights of the refugees in various jurisdictions. However, you absolutely need to know what the Convention said and what it was aiming to achieve to understand everything else that follows, or the legislation that flows from it. The framework is the backdrop, if you will, to the individual narratives, the machinery that people are fighting against, that can be the saviour for a few, more often a big hurdle for many others. And the better you can understand this framework, the better place we are to really advocate for the experiences of the individual. Anybody who wants to further their research in this area or looking at legal research, if you're a member of the postgraduate research community, you're very welcome to come down to the library, talk more to Hester and myself about researching this issue further. But we'll be on hand for the Q&A afterwards. So thank you very much, everyone.
Brilliant. Thank you, Hester and Laura. That was excellent. Right. I am going to attempt to share my screen now. Right, I hope everyone can see that. Right. Good afternoon. I'm Mike Townsend, one of the collection librarians here at the Institute of Historical Research. And during this presentation, I'll introduce some of the types of sources you can find here in our collections and highlight some of the ways in which you can search for them as well. And for anyone curious about any of the links or resources that I'm going to mention, don't worry about hastily jotting them down. We will send all attendees a document including links to all the resources mentioned in today's talks as well. So, for anyone unfamiliar with the Institute's library, our main focus for the last century since our foundation, and hopefully onwards, is to collect published editions of primary sources. As will be shown, this means the library has extensive collections of sources such as published letters, diaries, and government records. We also collect works about sources themselves, so whether they are guides to how to use a particular type of record, such as censuses, bibliographies and archive guides, as well as works on historiography, which I'll mention a little bit later on. We don't tend to collect too many secondary monographs, but you may find some which have been donated in the library as gifts as well. And as shown here, our chronological scope is from the early medieval period to the present day, and geographically we concentrate mainly on Western Europe, North and South America, and world history over the last 500 years, encompassing the periods of European colonialism. Within the library, readers can access a growing range of electronic resources, but just unfortunately, at present, we're not unable to provide remote access to these resources to the majority of our readers. Although if things do change, we will let our readership know. Right, so this is one of my video slides. So, right, good, that's moving. To get an idea of the types of resources you can find in our collections, we have prepared an extensive array of collection guides, which are arranged by place, period, format, and which interests us here, subject. There are quite a few, but among them is a collection guide for migration history. Like the other collection guide, this one has a brief introduction, and then gives an overview of the types of sources you can find, with links to our online catalogue to specific works. Also included are several case studies, which showcase how relevant source material can be extracted from some of the titles in the library, some of which may seem initially unrelated to the topic at hand. And let's carry on going. So some of the other case studies here, so migration of Chinese communities, migrant communities in medieval English towns, and Jewish immigration to North and South America. And right, so at the bottom, it showcases other collections that might be of use to you. And related content that you can also find on the IHR website. So, one of the links that you may have seen of related content in the guide below is Teaching British Histories of Race, Migration and Empire portal, shown here. In 2020, the IHR Library collaborated with the Runnymede Trust to create this portal, linking to, I think, maybe about 150 or maybe 170 freely available online resources. The resources are grouped into sections for specific potential audiences, from school pupils at various stages in their schooling, academic researchers, as well as general audiences, and those working in galleries, libraries, archives and museums, otherwise known as the GLAM sector. Just this week, I've added a link to the Ugandan Collections resource created by Carleton University in Ottawa, which includes transcripts from an oral history project recording the experiences of Indian Ugandans after Idi Amin ordered the expulsion of the community in 1972. So if you'd like to contribute to this portal, at the top of the page, there is a link to an online form where anyone can suggest any freely accessible online resource to be included on this page. Speaking of freely available online resources, an increasing number of monographs and journals are now available on what's known as open access. This means anyone can access and download them for free. Shown here are links to the directories of open access books and journals, which are also useful search tools for the increasing number of open access titles. Also, many publishers are also offering some or even all of their titles freely online. For example, Cambridge University Press currently have, I think, about 454 open access books, while the UCL Press is completely open access. So feel free to have a browse through there. Right, now, turning now to some of the specific types of sources you can find in the IHR Library. Here we have a few examples of the official governmental and legal sources in our collections, including the editions of the UK's 1905 Aliens Act, as well as Indian diplomatic papers we recently acquired, which discuss the refugees which were displaced during the Bangladesh War of Independence. Other types of official sources you can find in the IHR are published passenger lists, registers and surveys of immigrant communities, as well as what can be considered as general survey literature, such as works by Booth, Mayhew and Jack London, which can be found in our London collection. For the bulk of the talk, though, I want to highlight and emphasize the sources where you can find immigrant and refugee testimonies themselves, their lived experience in their own words. Some testimony can be found within some general anthologies of primary source material. This would sit beside excerpts of official documents and other sources which commented on specific events and communities, or as shown here, selections from biographies and writings of the slave trade from 18th century Black authors. Focusing more on their own words, the library also avidly collects memoirs and autobiographies, a selection of which can be are shown here. Some works highlights the experience of the refugee or immigrant themselves. Two of the works here are White Lie by Madiha Hafez Al-Bata and Light the Road to Freedom by Sabah Al-Babari are part of the Women's Voices from Gaza series, which I think we collect the other volumes as well. The authors of both works relate their experience of life before and after the Nakba, the Six-Day War, as well as their lives in later years and their observations of the Palestinian communities that they live in. Other works concern looking back at past generations. For example, here in The Unspoken as Heritage, the author, Harry Harutunian, relates his family's history, especially his parents, Ohanes and Vahanush, as they made their way to France and then eventually Detroit. Always in the background of this narrative, however, as Harutunian relates, was the unspoken and distinct legacy of the Armenian genocide, which his parents had fled. The library also has a large collection of published letters and diaries, some of which are shown here. As you might have surmised, we are eager to collect published editions of letters and diaries. We also are keen to collect works about genres of sources. For instance, the work shown here, Dear China by Gregor Benton and Hong Liu, is a study of the Chaopi, or letters Chinese migrants would send back to their families throughout the 19th and 20th century. And recently, we have been very active in collecting published interviews and oral histories, and one where the number of publications is growing rapidly, I feel at least. It is especially valuable since it can capture the testimony of individuals that might not necessarily appear in other types of sources. For instance, two of the works here, Child Migrant Voices and Coming of Age in Madrid, present the testimony of children and young adults in modern Britain and Spain, respectively. And as with many subjects, sometimes narratives are buried within more general sources. Many subjects can be found in sources such as newspapers, especially if they have a long publication run. Additionally, descriptive literature such as travel accounts and social surveys often have within them the words of individuals other than the author. For example, buried within volume 3 of Henry Mayhew's London Labour and the London Poor is a brief discussion he noted with a group of musicians from the Arabian Peninsula. As mentioned earlier, one of the exceptions we make when collecting secondary monographs is in the area of historiography and methodology. The library's collections in this area are also rapidly growing. The core of these collections still include works on historiographical thought, works about specific historians and ways of doing history, such as oral history methodologies, shown here. However, the remit of these collections has expanded over the last decade to also include subjects such as memory studies, commemoration, nostalgia, and the history in popular culture. So, as with most libraries and archives, the primary tool to find what you need is the catalogue. Shown here is one for us here in the Institute. Like many catalogues, you have the option of doing different types of searches, from general keyword searches to more specific ones based around author, title, or subject. Here I've done a subject search, typing in emigration and immigration, which gives me an alphabetical list of all the IHR catalogue entries beginning with that term. I think there's about 593 to be precise. Scrolling down, you can select the entry you want, which will then take you to the record itself, which will show you some more details like publication date, edition information, as well as, importantly, its location, class mark, and status. So listed here are some of the approaches I've personally used when finding resources in a subject for readers or myself, although I'm keen to hear of any other advice from any of our attendees or speakers. So I found doing a variety of searches useful to extract as much useful information as possible from a catalogue or a database. So I usually start with a keyword, but I also do regularly do subject, and if I know of some individual relevant to the subject, an author search as well. I also try to locate bibliographic references, either in published standalone bibliographies, or if that doesn't exist, the bibliographies and notes in a secondary monograph or even an article on the subject I'm looking into. They can also point me in the direction of some useful archive collections as well. Also, what I try to do is search what I call broad sources, such as newspapers or records of government. These usually have a broad selection of topics over their long runs of physical and online publication. Also shown here as well are some of the finding aids I regularly use for researchers' inquiries. For anyone unfamiliar with it, Library Hub Discover allows anyone to search 100 plus of the UK and Ireland's library catalogues all at once, so that's quite efficient. Similarly, WorldCat, as the name might imply, has a global reach and does more, more or less the same thing. Also, the National Archives catalogue doesn't just include the holdings there, but lists those of 2,500 UK archives as well. Finally, I've regularly used the directory of Rare Book and Special Collections by Karen Attar to identify specific collections for researchers. There is a print copy in the IHR Library, but I think there's also 39 other libraries which hold this, this particular title, including Universities of Bradford, Cardiff, Glasgow, Belfast, and the British Library. I found that through Library Hub Discover. Right, so moving on, here are a few of the case studies using some of the advice I outlined above. First up, I used a variety of searches, keyword and subject, to identify potential sources for about the Huguenot diaspora, which I knew we had, but which were scattered over several of the library's collections. The examples here are from our ecclesiastical, South African and Swiss history collections, but there were more. This is just a selection. Turning now to holdings in our French collection, I knew we had currently one biographical source which would highlight experiences of France's North African communities, the autobiographical work by the sociologist Professor Kutahachi. However, due to the library currently not having many other similar works, it would need to be supplemented by other works such as bibliographies to identify other potential relevant material, general anthologies of sources, as well as a few secondary works which may have some either primary sources or bibliographic information buried within them. Also, I just wanted to turn your attention to a similar session like this we delivered in 2022 about imperial and Commonwealth history, where I delivered an introduction to the library's colonial collections and looked into the sources researchers can find in the library about the Chinese diaspora in Britain during the 19th and 20th century. So moving away from the library briefly, just a bit, outlined here are some of the IHR's other activities. The Institute has a busy schedule of training and short courses, ranging from oral history, podcasting, and public history. Also, we have a busy calendar of events, which is worth checking. Just for the seminars alone, of which I think we currently have about 57 programs worth browsing. These usually take place late afternoon or early evening, and many are now hybrid. So you can tune in if coming to the IHR isn't an option as well. So just to finish up, here are some details about contacting us and membership. Besides email and phone, you can reach us on social media. So if you also about membership, I wanted to stress it is free for everyone. We don't even ask for ID or a letter from a tutor or anything. Just fill out an online form from the link listed here, although the link will be sent at the end of the session. And we can either send your membership card to you in the post, or you can collect it from the IHR reception on your first visit. And lastly, if you would like a one-to-one session on your specific research interests, just email us and we can arrange a time for either an in-person or an online session as well, because I know obviously a lot of stuff has been thrown at you today. So that's the library. I just wanted to pass over now to my colleague, Jenny, who will be introducing the crucial research tool, the Bibliography of British and Irish History. Right, so I'll just stop sharing.
Thanks, Mike. So I'll just share my screen as well. So hopefully you can see that all okay. And yeah, thanks, Mike, for the introduction. So yeah, I'm the editor for the Bibliography of British and Irish History, and today I'll be talking to you about how you can use it to research migration and refugee narratives. This slide just gives an overview of what I'm going to be talking about. So I'll give you a very whistle-stop tour through, introduce the bibliography and then do a kind of whistle-stop tour through how to search it and understanding a record, and then thinking about how you can access and read materials that you found in BBIH and different libraries, as well as some other features and resources that BBIH has that might be helpful for you for when doing academic work or further research. So the bibliography is a subscription database that contains a curated list of secondary sources that has been written about British and Irish domestic histories, as well as the wider British and Irish worlds, including the former British Empire and Commonwealth. The bibliography was established in 1909 by the UK's Royal Historical Society and is now supported by the Institute of Historical Research and our publisher Brepols. The bibliography contains over 660,000 references, covering a period of 55 BCE to the present day. And whilst the bibliography is particularly strong on British and Irish history, you can also use it to research more interdisciplinary areas within history. So that would obviously be the themes of today's workshop, but also thinking about race and ethnicity, gender, mental health, history of emotions, for example. The bibliography is updated 3 times a year in February, June and October, with approximately 10,000 new records added annually. And as I said earlier, it contains secondary sources, so that would be books, journal articles and reviews, book chapters in edited collections, and some history PhD thesis that have been published since or were submitted since the early 1990s. And if your research on migration and refugee narratives intersects with Irish history in any capacity, I'd highly recommend having a look at Irish History Online in conjunction with the bibliography so that you don't miss any important resources for your research. And Irish History Online is completely free for you to use as well. So despite the bibliography's name, material covering the rest of the world make up a really significant portion of our references that we contain. So as an example of the global reach of BBIH, this map here and the figures on the right-hand side indicate our coverage, excluding the British Isles. So some of the most common resources you'll find in BBIH focus on Irish, Scottish and Welsh diaspora studies internationally, migration to and between former British colonies and now Commonwealth countries, as well as political and religious exiles and refugees, especially from Europe, but also thinking about migration to colonial North America. So if you're at the very beginning of your research using BBIH, I'd recommend having a quick look at the subject analyzer, which you'll find in the bibliometrics drop-down menu. What this subject analyzer allows you to do is to find BBIH's top 50 authors, book series and journal titles on any BBIH subject. So it kind of gives you a good kind of overview of the most kind of popular authors within and titles within BBIH. And BBIH also recently got a new user interface, which now has a dynamic search screen that enables you to add and remove search fields depending on what your own research interests are. You can also change the existing categories, and you can also combine search fields with Boolean operators so that you can filter your results straight away. So there is also a new Search Anywhere option, which consolidates the wealth of information in BBIH into a single comprehensive search field. In addition to being able to do free text searches within the search field, you can search by bibliographical details, whether that be the kind of authors, editors, publishers, book series, journal titles. You can also search by BBIH's unique subject tree. So this subject tree contains over 8,000 keywords that have been developed by historians with historians in mind. You can also search by places, which enables you to conduct really granular level place-based searches. And you can also search by historical figures by using the person as subject filter as well. And then another way that you can search by subject within BBIH is by exploring the subject tree, which is in the subjects category. And what this allows you to do is go from kind of broader through to kind of narrower subject terms. So it starts off kind of on the right-hand side will be broader terms, and then you then move towards the right to get towards narrower terms until you reach the end of the tree. And you can also navigate between the broader and narrow terms by using the different arrows next to the each of the keywords, but also the kind of previous and next slides as well. So the first place I'd kind of suggest starting your research within kind of migration and refugee narratives is within social history, as this is where you can find search terms relating to exiles and refugees, as well as British and Irish diaspora. And if your research focuses on specific groups of people, you may also want to explore the narrow terms that are within ethnic groups, which in this slide here is just above expatriates, and then you can then add that to your particular searches. If your research focuses more on the histories of migration, you may also find relevant information within the demographic and environmental histories section of the bibliography. And within this area, you'd find examples of, for example, child or labour migration, as well as migration policies, both domestic policies for the British and Irish governments, but also increasingly colonial administrative imperial policies around migration as well. And you will also find relevant information within sources, especially if your research involves using different types of documents and records. For researching migration and refugee narratives, some of the more common sources you'll find in BBIH will be oral histories, census records, and autobiographical materials. So this could be diaries or memoirs. These three examples are by no means exhaustive, and I'd recommend exploring BBIH's subject tree so that you can build tailored searches and find information that is relevant for your own research interests. As I already mentioned, BBIH enables you to search by geographical location, and you can navigate this using the places tree, which you can see here, and you can navigate it in very much the same way as the subject tree. And as you can see in this example, some of the places that are here will include really specific districts or landmarks. So it enables you to build your searches kind of really based on particular areas or geographical locations that you're researching. And to help you better navigate the terminology that we use within the bibliography, I'd recommend having a look at the Gazetteer of British Place Names, a link of which is on this slide here. And the final thing I kind of wanted to point out really is that one of BBIH's unique features is that you can search by historical period. So when doing a kind of period covered search, you can either do kind of really broad searches, chronological range searches, or you could do very granular searches based on if your research only covers, say, a 5-year period. So yeah, that was a kind of quite a whistle-stop tour through searching, but we do have a number of tutorial videos which go into a bit more depth about kind of using BBIH, which I recommend that you have a look at. So once you have done a search, this is what the bibliography this is what the kind of search results look like. So this is the results page, or otherwise known as a hit list. And what this hit list now offers is comprehensive filter options on the left-hand side, which enable you to narrow down your search results based on your research interests. So, for example, if you're only interested in kind of brand new research that has been published in the last update to the bibliography, you could narrow it down by that. Or if you're wanted only access things and be able to read things online, then you could also narrow it down by that as well. And this is an example of what a record looks like within BBIH. This is an example for a journal article, but they all records for all resource types look very similar. But just one thing to note is that a book chapter is called an article within BBIH. And so, as I said, they're all kind of structured in the same way. So you'll find at the top of the screen the bibliographical information. So that would be kind of the creators of the work, the title, etc. In the middle, you would have the subject information. And then at the bottom, depending on the type of record you're looking at, you may find links to book reviews or links to the full text, whether that be via the DOI, the journal or publisher homepage, or online databases such as JSTOR or Project Muse. Any text in green is a link to a new search within the bibliography. So this is particularly helpful for finding what else the bibliography holds on your research topic. So in this example here, if you want to find out what else the bibliography holds on, say, migration policy, you could click on that. And then what it would then do is open up a new search within BBIH. So as you can see here, there are just over 700 references relating to that particular subject term. And you can also use the bibliography to do biographical research and learn more about particular individuals. And so in this example here, you can see that we have links to the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography, the UK National Archives catalogue, as well as who's who or who was who, which are highlighted in red next to the person's name. By clicking on the link, you'll be taken through to these resources, and I've included them in here because it's often worth exploring links within the bibliography, as they're a little bit hidden, but they may also be of useful for you when doing your research. So I've talked a bit about searching and what a record looks like. Now I'm going to move on to how you can navigate from BBIH to actually go about finding and reading the materials that you found. One of the great things about BBIH is that it links through to, you can navigate from BBIH to different library catalogues. If you're affiliated with an academic institution and they have a subscription to BBIH, make sure you're logged into your institutional library account before you start using it, as this will help with the seamless process of kind of finding out and accessing in materials if your library subscribes or has availability. Specifically within the IHR, you can access BBIH from the library catalogue or from the online collections page when you're in the building in the IHR, either from one of the computers in the library or when connected to the library Wi-Fi from your own device. And as Mike mentioned, membership to the IHR Library is free, so that would enable you to be able to use BBIH on site. And as Mike also mentioned, due to licensing restrictions, unfortunately, remote access to BBIH isn't possible. So it does mean that you would have to be in the library to be able to use it. And so you have, at the top of each record, you'll have several options to go about finding materials. If you're studying or working at an academic institution, the best place to start is by actually searching your own library catalogue first. And you can do this by clicking the button Find a Copy At, and this will take you through to the library catalogue where you can find information about print availability or online access. The next step would be to see if there is a full text available, and to do this you would click on the full text button, which will direct you to the publisher's website. If the resource you found has been made available open access, you could read it straight away. Otherwise, you'd need to check with your university library to see if they have access to that particular article or book online. Then the next stages would be to see what other libraries might have the resources that you're looking for. So you could do this in two ways. First would be via the Google Books button, which would take you through to Google Books, and then from there you can navigate to WorldCat. This is particularly helpful if your institution doesn't have that resource, and you could request it on Document Supply or Interlibrary Loan. Or alternatively, you could also use WorldCat to see if there are any UK public libraries that might have the resource that you're looking for. And similarly, if you click on the Library Discover button, that will take you through to JISC Library Hub Discover, which Mike mentioned and is another useful resource for finding materials. So whilst you might use the bibliography predominantly to find things for your own research, you can also use BBIH to keep up to date with the latest research in your own field, as well as managing reference lists and bibliographies. And to do this, our publisher Brepols have produced kind of several tutorial videos, which can be found at the link on the slide here. And so to keep up to date with the latest published research in your own field, you can BBIH has an email alert service, which is really easy to set up. The email alert service allows you to save your searches and then notifies you when a BBIH update contains new records that match your saved search. So when that happens 3 times a year, you'll get an email, and then you can click on the links, and then that will take you through, you'll log into BBIH and it'll take you through to your own personalized listing. So instead of you having to find lots of, search lots of different places, you can, make new research come to you, and it speeds up that process for you. And as I said, BBIH allows you to quickly compile bibliographies or add footnotes. To do this, you can either click on the Cite button, and then you can just copy and paste the citation that you need. And similarly, you can also export references to reference management software such as RefWorks, Zotero, and EndNote, which will save you time when compiling reading lists or bibliographies or adding footnotes. All you need to do is select Export button from the BBIH hit list, and then choose the most suitable option that you want to download your references in. And if you use Zotero, you'll need to have the plugin installed, and then you can then just save directly from the hit list particular references into your own Zotero library. And so in preparation for today's kind of workshop, we worked with our publisher Brepols to create a new online reading list about the histories of refugees and exiles. This reading list contains 421 items or references to recently published materials. So that have been published since between 2018 and 2025. But we also do have kind of a range of freely available online reading lists that cover a wide variety of interdisciplinary areas, such as women's history, Black British history, and the history of emotions, all of which can be accessed from the second link on this slide here. So I've talked a lot about how BBIH is a subscription resource, and which quite a few libraries in the UK and Ireland and internationally have a subscription to. But if you wanted to, if your institution doesn't have a subscription, or you can't make it to the IHR to use it on site, you may want to consider getting an annual individual subscription, which would enable you to use BBIH remotely. If you're a member of the IHR Friends and Fellows, an individual subscription is available for £35 for this calendar year. But if you are also a member or fellow of the British Association for Local History, the Historical Association, or the Royal Historical Society, individual subscriptions are also available at a significantly discounted rate. To give you an indication, the full price of the subscription is for this year is kind of £160. So it is a really significant discount if that's something that you think is going to be relevant for your research, but your own institution doesn't have a subscription, or you're unable to make it to London to the IHR to use it. And if you'd like to keep up to date with, if you'd like to contact the bibliography, contact information can be found here. And Mike has already touched upon this, but there is a wide variety of wider work that the IHR and the bibliography is doing, which can be found on these slides here. So thank you very much for attending today's presentation.